Well, hello, and this is a very special Q&A we're doing here for the Race Members Club. We've got Mr. Le Mans, Tom Kristensen, with us to discuss his book, which is just out right now, and to answer some of the questions that you've sent in for us. So, without any further ado, hello, Tom. How you doing?
Hey Andrew, good to meet you, meet you.
Yes, it's not quite the same as being able to do face to face, but this technology is pretty good.
It is. Go ahead.
Okay, so the first question, obviously, you've had an amazing life and career, but what's the thinking of the timing of the book now? Why have you done it now?
Yeah, I don't know. Reflecting on a long life, I think when Dan approached me, it was right after I finished my career. So before in the winter of 2015, and there I felt I couldn't care less about a book at that point. So I think it matured a little bit over time. And when he asked me again, let's say a couple of years ago, we made this Danish book, which is now translated and added by some very good and knowledgeable journalists like Gary Watkins, Charles Bradley, and Niels Finderup. So have a period, three different periods of my life, and with Dr. Ulrich's forward, they went in all unedited, and then Dan and myself worked on the getting the book onto the English market.
You had a long, varied career, not to mention your life outside of racing. So, how long did it take you to recall this entire story?
We spent, I think, nearly 4 months, more or less, having a. I gave access so Dan could interview people close to me, and with that in hand, we then sat down, let's say once a week. I had a coffee, he had some water. He hates coffee, and then I went on talking a lot about racing in particularly, but he wanted to hear more about let's say the other stuff, more the personal stuff, more the thinking behind it, or actually the what went about in my life from my perspective, and that was the Danish book. And then it was added then another, let's say, half or at least one third of the book with the other three gentlemen and the foreword of Dr. Ulrich. That put the racing much more in perspective than the original author Dan wanted to add. It won the sports book of the year in Denmark, the Danish version. So obviously that also kind of helped. That all right, it can't be too bad, my life. So let's make an international version too, and here it is, a thick book, yeah.
It's an excellent book. It really is. I think the story is told really well, which just made me wonder. You mentioned in the book about this scrapbook that your parents keep. Was that the main source for your recollections? Because how can you recall it all? I mean, I struggle to remember things that happened a couple of weeks ago these days.
Yeah, but I think many times in when you ask particularly us people in racing in generally, Andrew, you can remember the races where you were there, which really make an impact on you, good or bad. Definitely, these things are in your heart and soul, and certainly as a young driver dreaming about and having the passion for motorsport, these things are very deep in me. For sure, it's helped by the interviews he did with people close to me, but also, let's say, the scrapbooks I probably did a little bit too. Dan is a journalist on one, or at the time, the sports editor of Jyllandsposten, very respected Danish newspaper. So probably also some of his articles along the way has been kind of focus points for some of the stories, at least in his part.
Yeah, I guess the races where you finish out of the points or whatever don't stick in the mind, and no one asks him about them anyway.
Yeah, but I think we came about that true because, as you know, I mean, many times these are these irritating periods of time where you certainly not very proud either of yourself or what happened, or these things which actually makes you really really making sure going forward. And sometimes in life you need these being kind of mental being told off to go extreme into preparing yourself for the good ones. So I think we come about some of the, let's say, you can say bad moves or desperate moves or unlucky moves. These are also part of the story.
I thought there was a particularly moving sector of the book where you talk about your relationship with your father and perhaps the difficulty in expressing your feelings to one another. And I wondered how hard that was to write and what impact that might have had, as you as a parent yourself and dealing with your kids.
Yeah, I think it's a process which. Of course, after my dad died in 2013, it just realized that now, hey, I'm the head of the family now. That sort of slowly digged in. But it's true that I've had many times you could even say not necessarily a healthy relationship to my dad, but on the other hand, he has had an enormous impact because we share the same passion for motorsport. I never felt that he was pushing me to go into motorsport, but he was definitely my inspiration in many ways, and he was also a critic of me, and maybe sometimes he was even hard to me, even though that I didn't necessarily feel it that way. But yeah, God, I I miss him, and I miss my mother, who was, of course, uh, his he was she was very different, but they were lovingly for me and my brother, and it has been kind of good time and good to reflect on this, and for sure also on my children, who obviously have seen my wife more than double as me when you look about the early years of their childhood, and so forth. That becomes very important to reflect on that, and to reignite that thing when they are getting older is has put, as the book shows, some situations where I definitely feel left out in conversations. They could have a conversation for 10 minutes, and I had to be careful where to join in, not to be, of course, to be laughed off.
Or make one of your dad jokes that they don't allow you to make now.
Yeah, they tend to like them. The only problem is when I just before I even start the first word, they will put up the hand and say, "Dad, don't go there, don't go there." That becomes a bit irritating when they already know where I'm gonna go. So, but I guess that's life being a modern dad.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's true. There's a brilliant picture of you with, I don't know, you must be 3 or 4 years old, and like a sit on, almost like a single seater thing. Can you remember that? Is it like if you close your eyes, can you picture yourself being there with it?
Yeah, I mean, these pictures are very valuable. So, I mean, nowadays you have, of course, a million pictures about everything. But from the childhood, it has been very gold to look, and that actually was, for me, by clearly the best part of making the book was to dig for pictures, and actually some have arrived much later. But thanks God, then they were able to go into this international book. But yes, picture it. But I remember born on this gas station. I remember a little bit the life when I was walking around there in shorts and t-shirts, and couldn't look over our dog. We had a German Shepherd, German Shepherd called King. It was friendly, but I mean, nowadays, who would have a gas station having a German Shepherd running around freely? You that's, I guess, the opposite of a win-win. But nobody would definitely stop to fill his gas tank. But that was life at my gas station, and King was a lovely dog, and that's something I definitely recall from my childhood.
The book begins recalling that terrible accident that you had in the DTM race at Hockenheim. But you mentioned when you're on the grid, the sound of all the engines around you, which made me think about, of all the cars you drove, which was the best sounding?
Best, yeah. I mean, yeah, best sounding. I mean, DTM is very loud. I wouldn't call it the best sound, definitely not. But it was. It could also be irritating, and certainly further that year when I came back racing, it was irritating. Best sound is probably it could be the BMW V12 natural aspirated engine, which we were running at Le Mans '99, for example, '98, '99, with Raffanelli and with the Williams chassis. It could also be the TS010, the V10 of the Toyota Group C, which sort of matured me a little bit in sports cars, because I did some of these very dangerous tests at the Yamaha test circuit in Japan, which was fast and had, yeah, I think it had a half a meter wall next to the track. But that engine really, but also something about the BDA engine of a Ford Escort, because that goes back to my childhood days. I mean, I remember my dad going around at it's called Korsgrubanen in it was a long oval, 1,000-meter oval, but he was
That's a good impression.
just going around there, but the air filter was not tight enough. So obviously he only did the qualifying. That was the engine was sandblasted before the start. But that is something. I think these three engines are very important for my roots of my sound career.
I thought you might say something that came from one of those members meeting races that you've done at Goodwood or whatever, because there is something about the older engines where the noise they make is, I don't know, somehow more, gets into your soul a bit, I think.
No, for sure. I mean, the Ferrari, the V12 Ferrari there is also good. But I think with the impact of, I think these three engines are very different, and certainly are also. I mean, you could also have. I've also done the IMSA GTO from Audi, to have the gears with the turbo. That's also something which you don't hear, certainly not in modern times. And but they made an impact on you. And but a high revving, good old kart engine from the early '80s, high revving as they were. That's also something which is become more modern again as they are running some of these historic series. So, but I guess all this, I think you have to have seen it live in earnest, in real life, in racing, to real understand the, let's say, the sound of it. But yeah, amazing sounds, absolutely, Andrew.
So we open the questions up to our members to submit. So the following ones are mainly from them. The first one looks back at that career that you had in Japan, when, I mean, effectively the doors were all closed for you in Europe. But at the time, there were a lot of, let's call them foreigners, trying to make their name out there. But all the guys you raced against, who were the ones that stood out for you?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many. We were a lot of guardian drivers, which is called then. But I won the German F3 championship, and I didn't have money enough to go to Formula 3000, even though there was a few teams ready to take me on, but I didn't have the budget. So I could stay in Formula 3 with but nobody does that with the same team and continue. So I went to Japan, but teammates of the following year was Jack Villeneuve, Richard Rydell, Tetsuya Tanaka, and then from foreign there was Anthony Reid, there was Derek Higgins, there was Richard Dean. There was there was so many people at that time, and that was, and then in Formula 3000, you'll mention Mauro Martini, Marco Apicella, Ross Cheever, Eddie Irvine, Jeff Krosnoff, Roland Ratzenberger, oh, Andrew Gilbert Scott. I'm sorry, you always tend to forget some, and I'm not very.
What about the locals? Were there any of the Japanese guys that never got any recognition over here?
Yeah, I don't know if they got. I mean, the one I respected a lot, because I went to drive both in F3, then in touring cars, then in Formula 3000, then in GTs. So I drove sort of all the spectre there, and I would say Hoshino, Kazuki Hoshino. Hoshino-san. He didn't speak a lot of English, but he was a down to earth, a hard worker, and a bloody good driver. Very certainly a few years older than me, absolutely, because he was on the grid in one Grand Prix in Fuji. Maybe it was back in '77, but it was something like that.
Yeah.
So he obviously made it, but he, in a way, he was a national hero, and I definitely realized why, because he was never going about or screaming, or he was a very there was a lot of respect, mutual respect to the fellow drivers. So when we met him, it was, we could do a lot with hand gesture. I learned a little bit of Japanese, and maybe he could say yes, no, fast. Maybe this was a thing he could say, or he could say no, no, no. But I mean, these are the things which definitely created some good small talk on the grid or right after, before you went on the podium. So he was one of them. There was more of these guys, but I would say Hoshino-san was a guy we all respected and kind of learned from, and how he went about his racing in Japan.
Yeah, he's often mentioned as being the guy that maybe could have been the first Japanese driver to win a race had he actively pursued an F1 career. But I think he made a nice living for himself in Japan, didn't he? So,
absolutely. He also went on driving, let's say, with a very high and late age, which is I respect a lot in Japan. But he was probably faster when he was younger. But he was a national symbol, and he loved his racing, and he has nothing to be embarrassed about. And he's also doing his own team now.
Back when I was at Autosport, we did a long feature looking at the best drivers never to race in Formula One, of which you were ranked at number one. But I just wondered, from your perspective, who was the guy that you raced against that was the best guy who didn't go to Formula One?
It's something of an accolade, and it really has been in, let's say, an important article, because a lot of people have mentioned that. So I'm very thankful for that. But as drivers, I met a lot of drivers. Of course, during my Audi career, some have done and raced in Formula One with success as well. Some have not done it, but absolutely there's a crop of talent which I could mention any of these drivers. But if I go back to the time in Japan you touch on, I mean. To go to Japan, I had to win the German F3 that was with Jörg Müller, Marco Werner, Peter Cox, Wolfgang Kaufmann. And then in Japan, this relationship to live in the same apartment building with Richard Rydell. And we went about toward testing and racing, as we are both Scandinavian. So we realized the expenses, which we got in cash in an envelope, we looked sort of at each other and said, all right, if we drive in the same car to the test and the same car back, we will have earned a little bit of money. So even though we were fighting for the title again, we also had sometimes very, you can say, very long time to debrief, but we were very short for words sometimes. And I think that relationship with Ricard is certainly somebody I respect a lot. And I'm sure that we both kind of learned the good and bad from each other. But it was, I think it's a very healthy situation that you actually with your direct, you if you have something to speak with your direct competitor. We were not in the same team, but we were of course signed under Tom's, but for different teams. That was that's a driver who I always will have the greatest respect for.
We're going to talk about Le Mans for the first time, but absolutely not the last. And those events of '99, I think most people can recall the image of Peter Dunbreck's car flying up through the air. But there's a passage in the book where you mention, is it 30 meters or whatever, that you were supposedly in the air in the BMW in that race? Was there a
Yeah,
point in time where, over that weekend, when you were scared?
yeah. I mean, but yeah, you can say so. After that was I was actually at the pre-test for myself, and that was I when I came into the pits, having just brushed the Amcar, but I had been in the air going down to Indianapolis, and just by luck in terms of speed and in terms of that the rear brakes were, I just brake with the left foot, let's say, in an instinct that had just been able to keep the front from going more up. And the small anyway, I got back in the pit lane, and they sort of asked, "Hey, what are you doing? We need to pre qualify." And the track was getting faster as we started on wets. I was then on. This was my first run on intermediates, and there was a dry. A dry line appearing. So of course the times were tumbling down. So I came into the pits and said I had this huge issue, and they couldn't find anything on it. So I think the minutes before that, actually, the data engineer and with Patrick Head, who was present, they suddenly realized that yeah, they could see there was no damper struts for about 30 35 meters. They then looked at the problem, but it took some minutes before they realized that it was the floor which sort of split open and created an air loom, and that air loom or air scoop between the floor and the underside of the monocoque, that had created this aerodynamically, let's say, lethal. So they fixed that with very, let's say, very fast. So, but they explained it a few times. Initially, they came back and said, "No, there's no problem, Tom. You can. There's no problem." And at that point, I said, "All right." I was ready to jump out, and they could let Sober Stuck take over the car at that point. But off I went, and I had 20 minutes, and I qualified. So I guess that's an answer to that. I was not scared anymore, but I definitely had my, and that's normal when there is something of a particular problem of the car any racing driver has. It's very difficult to unleash the full potential when you're focusing on these issues. So thanks God it was solved, and thanks God it didn't go any worse with Dombrek, which was then a year later in the race, or with me during this little episode.
Of all the racing drivers I've ever spoken to, when they feel in control of the car, they feel invulnerable. They can do anything. But when it's taken out of your hands, so if the car's in the air, there's nothing you can do, is there? You're completely powerless.
No, that's I mean that's ultimate of scary or frustration. This of running out of brakes or running out of steering wheel. I mean, these are the three things which is a driver's worst nightmare for sure.
We've just passed May the 1st, which is a time when people remember the late Ayrton Senna, and obviously the day before that, somebody that you mentioned earlier, Roland Ratzenberger. There was that period in the 90s where the cars were maybe exceeding the safety of the circuits. Looking back at that, what do you think about those eras now and the effect that they've had on the sport today?
They definitely have had an enormous impact. Just looking today, I mean, we of course still mourning the losses which we had during those years, and imagine what would have been, what would have how would they have developed if there hadn't been for these these fatal accidents. In total, we have learned a lot. The sport has gone on to a lot of let's say better things in terms of safety from the regulation, in terms of safety for the things that the cars have to pass, in terms of reliability, in terms of all these things in the different categories, from karting to touring cars, to Formula cars, to LMP cars, to Formula One cars. That has all done to much better. And touching on that note, I will even say, as the circuit obviously also has got a lot sort of safer if you are alone on the track, and if you are going to have any of these issues, which the poor people you mentioned they had, you would also be a lot safer. The only thing is that we just compromise a bit on the sporting, not on the cars at all, but on the circuits. And this is what we have seen over the last 10 years, that we the word track limits has been a very familiar word to anyone in racing. And that is where the safety, unfortunately, have compromised the sporting a little bit. And that's where we without compromising the safety, needs to go a little bit back. We need to be a little bit more aligned with other categories of our sport under the FIA umbrella, but also under FIM, the motorcycles, as they actually require or are very happy at present. But we are not, because we would like to have that if you run wide, we want a natural deterrent, and we want to see that if you sort of leave the track a little bit, it's up to you to make sure you go faster, but the track should be made well enough to make sure that you definitely go slower, and you don't want to be too much off the track. But that is something which is a part of a bigger story, Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's something that's come into play at every race in Formula One we've had so far this season. But I feel we could probably talk about that for an hour, and this is more about your book, so let's revisit that at another time.
I agree.
I imagine you've been asked this question a gazillion times, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Of those 9 Le Mans wins, which is your favourite?
It could even be one of the ones where we didn't win, but still, I mean, of the ones winning, the most important, the biggest impact is, of course, the first one being signed these 4 days before the race in '97, and that's I think where Dan describes that very well in the book. So that one is the impact. I think over these 6 days at Le Mans, at my first, I learned more than I probably did in an entire school year. You just realize at one stage that you have the chance, and you're just making sure that you really take advantage of it. Many other years, but I mean, let's say 2008, Peugeot had killed our performance at Sebring, and we were humiliated a little bit, you can say the least. And we did not want to have the same beating at Le Mans. Everyone in the team, we were a 2-car team at that race, and we were going very hard at it. Everyone did the ultimate, and due to the rain at times in the race, we overcome, and we won a race which we certainly shouldn't have. That was very sweet, and that was something which the whole team, and Dindo and Alan, my teammates as well, we all we all drove, let's say, beyond the limit for most of the race. And 2013 was very, very tough mentally. Alan Simonsen, a few hours into the race, we heard the tragic news, and that race I was actually driving with a lot of sadness, as my dad had passed away a few months earlier. So, in generally, these three are editions of the 24 Hours of Le Mans, which has a deep personal impact on me.
This was going to be a two-part question, but you might well extend it to three parts. In the foreword, Dr. Ulrich mentions that you handpicked your teammate at Le Mans, which we'll get onto in a sec. But the question is, if you could have picked any two drivers from any teams, who would they have been? But also, if you could have picked any drivers from any point in history, who would they have been?
Yeah, but I have been blessed with teammates at Le Mans. I did 18 starts at Le Mans, and I had 16 teammates as Marc Genet sobbed Loic Duval after his crash in practice at our last edition in 2014. So with Lucas Di Grassi, Marc Genet, and myself. So that made it 16 teammates. And just to counter a little bit, Dr. Ulrich, he write in the foreword that I never handpicked my teammates at all. But there's 1 year where we were going back after we have had these private teams with the R8. I drove for Team Go, I drove for the Champion, and I had been driving for Bentley, and Audi was coming back with the TDI era. And at that point, I did say that I would like to go with Capello and Magnish, as we had a kind of relation. I mean, Alan and me had fighted dogs and cats over the R8s going at Sebring the year before. And with Dindo, he was my teammate in America the 2 years we did the ALMS, whereas I was driving at Le Mans with Bila and Piero. So I think that's the only thing I have said, and I think Dr. Ulrich was happy to make that happen. But all the other years, I had zero impact on that. So I was happy with all my teammates, any one of them. Seiji, Guy Smith. Actually, I didn't drive really with Hans Stuck because we retired before he got into the car. But the cockpit was so small that he was already very compromised getting in there when I drove with Sober and him. But in history, to drive with X and Bell was because they were what they achieved shortly before I entered, or what they achieved during the years when I got inspired for Le Mans, would of course be something which would have been very nice for me to experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. This question came from our Formula One editor, Mark Hughes. Of all of those 16 teammates, who was the most fun?
They were no fun. Nobody was fun at all. See, they were all great, but fun. Fun has to be Dindo, because Dindo would always there wouldn't be a debrief or a meeting in generally without him cracking a dry joke. And the good thing was it was sometimes splitting between nationalities, because Dindo definitely Dindo. If it has to be a debrief, because he wouldn't normally always make the pre-briefings, because he would get lost from the airport or the hotel and not make it in time. But for sure, during a pre-briefing, if he would make it, also him.
And this one from Gary Anderson's our technical editor, I think this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. What was it like being Stewart's test driver, and what did you make of the way Michelin went about their F1 testing?
Oh la la, Gary! I don't know. I first of all, I was doing a test with Williams when Frank Williams called me, and I was very, very proud of that call. End of '99. But it was in 2000 when I did all the Michelin testing, initially with Williams BMW. And then it's true that after I had signed with Audi, I think Mario Tyson and Gerhard Berger, they realized that, he's driving for Audi, so maybe he shouldn't drive our Formula One car in testing. And then I was sort of picked up by Jaguar. And that chassis was the Stewart chassis from '99, and I was very happy to do all this mileage in a Formula One car. It was the groove tires. So Michelin make incredibly good racing tires, which I have already experienced and learned to know about Le Mans. And now with their comeback into Formula One, it was a very very important test program. There were certainly days which were kind of challenging, particularly when you had an engine which had for there was 120 kilometers miles left in that one. We would have 170 left in another one. So what was very challenging was that when you before you do three long runs on the three sets of tire constructions you have decided, and the tire people goes to the engine people to say, all right, can we do a long run of 3 times 20 laps? And the engine people will come back and say, we will exceed by, can we do 12 laps? And then because there's not enough miles less, and then left, and then they will go, okay, let's cut it down in the middle. We go 3 times 15 laps. And what happens, of course, on the second run, on the 14th lap, the engine goes, and then we have to do it all over again. So more mileage for me, but probably a little bit of frustration sometimes from the technical people. And maybe that's what you want to hear, Gary.
I think it might be. There's a whole host of stories in the books about F1 chances that didn't come. Probably a very lucky escape that the Lola thing didn't pay off. Minardi, BAR, Williams, and it's just they just keep on coming. But at what point in your mind was the Formula One door finally closed?
I mean, it's probably never closed in that sense, because it was kind of closed. But then I had really this run where we won at Le Mans, and I had this run which sort of continued, and there was always coming something, let's say, back at me, but I didn't take it seriously because I really really enjoyed the way that Audi went about the racing, and I really had found the home where I could give a lot of feedback to the engineers, and they would work at it, and that was how we all felt in this community of the Audi Sport drivers. But I don't know. Maybe when I went to touring cars again and BTCC, for sure, then you can say the door literally is really closed. But then again, I would say this was a lot of F1 knowledge went into these touring cars, and the budgets at that time in the final year of BTCC Super Touring, I was very happy to take part in that, and I was very proud of winning at the end of the season, and winning the final 2 races of that series would even have been good to go further forward.
So you tested quite a lot of F1 cars, but of all of those, which one did you feel was the best?
As I tested the groove tires, you lost a bit of grip at the slow corner. So probably the best sensation I had in an F1 car was, and it's not the best Williams ever, of course. It was one of the most troubled, the FW21 V10 with the Megachrome engine, and that they were not very successful. But at that time, it was for me a very interesting car, and the test I had to do for them was proper. And I would also say that Williams was the team I was closest with to get behind the steering wheel, but obviously at the same time there was a lot of other great talent and drivers around.
We'll go back to Le Mans now, and you talk about how it was
probably,
a child.
Probably just in back of my mind, I also drove the Lotus, the T98, actually the T3 car, the Senna car up the Goodwood Hill.
Cool.
And of course, that's not a real proper test at all. But I would just say that was amazing step back in time, and that sort of gives you a little bit the line about how F1 cars have evolved.
Do you know what boost levels you were running that day?
Yeah, it was not as high as in time.
So
and
you
uh,
didn't
but
have 1,200 horsepower or anything
and
insane.
we were below 1,000. I can promise you that, and I was also pretty happy about that because a little bit fishtailing out of out of one of the corners at Goodwood Hill. I mean, I might have been picked up a few kilometers in the wrong direction.
Yeah, it's not exactly wide, is it?
Yeah,
So I'll go back to that the question about your relationship with Le Mans in your childhood. You mentioned the Ixbel era. When you
yeah.
finally got to the track and you went out, did it feel like that realization of a dream? What was that emotion like?
Yeah, but with any driver, when you come to Le Mans, you get that particular emotion you already get when you're going through scrutineering and all the things which I mean, after a couple of years, you actually don't fancy so much. But the real joy is when you take to the track after. And it took a little time before I got in. There was Michele, there was Stefan doing the laps in the car, making sure everything was fine. And then I got in, and it was already, that evening of a pre-summer sensation, driving around a long circuit and realizing that you are actually gone for quite a long time, which is very unusual when you are lapping in a racing car normally. That sensation of looking for the breaking points at Mulsanne, how you let it come into the Indianapolis corners, and all these things which I've just by mouth to mouth got from particularly Michele, who went around with me on a scooter, as there was simply no data back then of the car. There was no telemetry or nothing, so it's completely out of hand of the data locking you have today. So there was a lot of things which made it very special. And damn yes, I remember the first laps of a track which was not changed in terms of, let's say, runoff, asphalt runoff, or the barriers moved, or and also there was no lights, no floodlight on the track at all. What we had to was you can open your eyes and you use your little bit of your front lights of this private used Porsche.
This is a question from our MotoGP podcast host, Toby Moody. How often do you wear your Le Mans Rolex Daytona?
Thank you, Toby. I mean, he knows because he never looks me in my eyes. He always, when he puts a question, he looks at my left hand, and I appreciate that. I wear it every day, but I don't sleep with it, so there's a chance there, Toby.
I mean, don't let him know that. He'll be sneaking into the motorhome in that. There's a bit in the book where I was completely unaware of, really, and that was the relationship you had with the Danish ASN, the DASU, and how they'd overlooked some of your earlier career achievements. Looking back, do you understand why that was?
Looking back, I'm completely fine. I think this. I mean, this is not from my recollection. That's from Niels, the way he saw it and the way he describes it. And I can agree with some of it, and I also found it very irritating at the time, as you of course feel that you sort of are put to the sideline, but it was sometimes it was not meant like that. And I think sometimes they are, of course, helping with the people who they either know best. And at that time I was in Japan, very far away from anything, and with no social media, it was difficult to really to put that up, to put my results up front. But there was something with it, but I have absolutely no problem with it these days. And also, as I'm involved with FIA, I have a very good relationship with the board of people sitting at DASU today.
Denmark's a small country. As you say in the book, it doesn't make cars. Yeah, it's done pretty well in creating racing drivers. At the moment, in Lundgaard and Vesti, seems to have some really good young talent. How involved are you in helping to mentor those and guide them in the right direction?
They are very well managed, the people you mentioned, but we in general we have so many people at the top of various motorsport at the moment. We have world champions in LMGTE with Sørensen Tim, and there was Michael Kristensen. We have in the pro-am coming up. We have Nicholas Nielsen. We have now Kevin is going, of course, after F1 is going well in the States. He's signing with Porsche, which Mikkel Jensen has joined in as well as a young up and coming superstar. So in that sense, we have quite a lot, and also we have two good ladies, Michelle Gatting, Christina Nielsen, and in I can mention a lot more than the two you mentioned. So in that sense, we are very proud of what have been achieved, and I think the inspiration I had when I was young was from the Danish driver was Kurt Tim, John Nielsen, Chris Nissen. They inspired me to go abroad, and I'm sure also they inspired the similar time Jan Magnussen and Jason Watt, which was sort of, you can say, my generation. And I think it has just got bigger and bigger. So we really got the wheels turning, and it makes me proud to see how many Danes are performing at a high level today.
You make it clear in the book, and actually earlier on in this conversation, about the mentoring role that Michele Alboreto played for you when you first got to Le Mans, and then again when you were at Audi, and also the tragic accident that befell Alan Simonson in the race in 2013. Did either of those points make you question carrying on driving, and did you consider retiring?
It definitely. I mean, I was also sitting alone on initially on the very late the evening around midnight when Roland died and when Ayrton Senna died in Japan, racing there. So that, I think, was probably also a time of reflection in that sense, but it never put me in my own thing. It was more putting the thing that you feel for those, and then I also realized that a lot of these things were then questions from, let's say, from the mother side of of my family, and that was something which I had to give good answers to, and I also realized that for the rest of her life, actually, that's the only thing I regret, was that my mom died before I finished my career, because that was probably a moment. Uh, she, I didn't take it that serious, but after my first year as a professional, when I won the German F3 championship, I came home for that Christmas and was, of course, I was in my dreams. I was so happy I had won my German F3 in my first year competing there, and she suggested during the Christmas dinner that, bravo, Tom, it's done fantastic. You have proven yourself. Maybe it's time to go back to the bank. And that was back in '91. And so she had, for the rest of her life, she always had a little bit the scare of every time I raced, or particularly at Le Mans.
Yeah, I think it's harder for those people at home just watching on, because they have no control, do they? They're just bystanders.
Yeah, that's true.
You mentioned the being in the British touring cars. I mean, at the time, do you think that was the most competitive series that you raced in? You know, the time when all those manufacturers were involved.
I don't. Yeah, it's certainly competitive, but I would say Japanese touring car was also competitive. But you can say, at the experience that both the teams and drivers had at the top on the very, you can say, the British circuits were very, very challenging, uh, and everyone knew a trick or two about any track you went to. If you went to Throxton or Oulton Park, I would say Oulton Park was more difficult because I won there, but it was probably not. But then at Throxton, at the high speed, I didn't make a win. Knockhill, I made it to the podium, but I didn't make a win. But it's very different circuits, and there's, of course, there was also Mr. Plato made sure I didn't win at Brands Hatch Indy circuit. But on the other hand, I certainly loved the challenge of that track too. And being in DTM also later was something which I find a very tough and competitive series, but where the cars are more sophisticated in terms of aerodynamics, which means that you suddenly had to stay away of hitting other drivers, not even touching, as the flicks or the carbon would come off. There, you could be more physical about it in BTCC, which uh, sometimes were definitely very important. But I think definitely the first half of the year I was more at the receiving end. Unfortunately, maybe you can add Matt Neal to this conversation as well. But there were different occasions where I I certainly could have been a little bit harder or smarter.
Following on the DTM theme, it's a question from Glenn Freeman, who's our editor in chief. It's that, did you enjoy racing in DTM? Because it did seem to be incredibly political.
Yes, I enjoyed, but I was, let's say, I did. I really enjoyed that you went there, and it was just, it was really like a sprint. So combine it with the sports car racing I did, and then doing DTM, it was brilliant. Um, it was just after a few years when I have won races, I've had fastest lap and whatever. Of course, the pressure then came to say, "Hey, all right, now we shouldn't treat it as just fun. You better make sure that you win the championship now, Tom." And that was the feeling I had. And then, of course, it becomes uh, even, let's say, even more challenging. And the campaign with 2006, where I was leading until, and also leading at Brands Hatch, and I was dominating at Brands Hatch, and that was something which I recall with my engineer, that we had a fantastic car, and then suddenly, out of the blue, unfortunately, the suspension bent, it broke, and then I had to retire. From then on, let's say it became a little bit of let's say a pain, and it also became something I regret, that I didn't win in DTM, because that's something which will have fitted well. I mean, I understand why I didn't win the BTCC championship. There, I would have needed to do another year. My second season, I might have been in with a chance. But DTM, you can say I did 4 seasons, full seasons, and I didn't succeed, and I'm sad about that. I had 2 times I was the best Audi, but both times it was a car with this point
Target.
the target on the what do you call it, the front
On it,
of
yeah.
the car,
Yeah.
which unfortunately went away, and my championship was gone.
Which obviously leads us into that crash that we mentioned right at the top of this interview. That was an enormous hit. I remember watching it live on TV and being genuinely concerned. How hard was it for you physically and mentally to get back racing after that crash?
It was I had a lot of let's say in the aftermath of it all, I had a lot of kind of, I don't know, symptoms, but it was a tough period. I got all the help from Audi, from the doctor, and also Dr. Ulrich, our boss. It was very important, and I think that what ultimately cleared it was the determination to make sure that you don't finish your career like that. I wanted to be back racing, and ultimately the date for Le Mans was then 2.5 months later, and then that's when I decided I want to use this as a comeback, and it worked. It worked fine, but I have to say then the rest of the year in DTM, I had a lot of dizziness and a lot of problems, but that was mainly due to the heat and the sound of the car. That every night in the rest of the year was not always perfect, for sure.
Okay. We can see one on the table behind you. You must have, I don't know how many hundreds of trophies you must have won in your career, but it's a lot. Do you keep them all? And if so, where? And what's the one that means the most to you of all the awards you've got?
Um, yeah, but I don't. I mean, I've kept in respect all my trophies, and I have them here, and at my at my office, at my showroom. In I've kept them, even the ones which has higher numbers on, and there's of course a few, but I was thinking about melting them into a big square, maybe even like a table or something. But a friend of mine said no, it would be cool to make it a little bit like a tree, and so they are put up on a tree which fills the room between the two storage,
Yeah.
and in that sense they, even the ugly ones, which there's a few of these trophy according to my wife, they're not very pretty, so it makes a little bit of of a unique one piece instead. And then the Le Mans winning trophies have a space for themselves, but I would say being, as you say, let's say accolade. I mean, being in the Hall of Fame of motorsport and in the Danish Motorsport Hall of Fame, the Danish Sports Hall of Fame of all sports in Denmark was, of course, a bit of a sort of a nice finish or blue stamp to me, to be able to retire with not an accident, but instead of with a little bit more, let's say, happiness or proudness in that sense. I think that that has been pretty nice. Sitting down with the Queen to have a personal talk with the Queen is also something which I definitely cherish
Yeah.
as a lovely memory. We might even have talked about her sons and how good they were in racing, but of course I can't refer to any of these private talks. But of course, these are something which are, of course, special to any of us breeds of as drivers.
Absolutely. Finally, you mentioned that compared to Dindo and Alan in particular, you were much bigger and much heavier, and that you might have had to deny yourself over time, especially your favourite buttermilk soup. So now you can eat it whenever you like. When was the last time you had it?
I had it last night. I arrived with a late flight, and my wife was already to bed, and then I took it at the very healthy time before I went to bed. Not good.
Well, it doesn't matter now, does it? You'll still keep yourself fit and trim. So there you go.
I try.
Tom, thank you so much for your time. That was brilliant, and the book is fantastic. I'd recommend everyone go out and buy it. And I look forward to seeing you when I'm allowed back in the paddock again, without being stuck in a bubble.
Yeah, we all look forward for that. Thank you very much, and thanks to all your listeners who gave. Yeah, you made me work. Gave me good questions. Thank you.
Cheers.